Welcome everybody to this Doing the Work session, embedding anti-racism and decolonisation in museum practice. This is a series of practice-focused workshops devised by the Contemporary Art Society and the Decolonising Arts Institute at the University of the Arts, London. There are 8 workshops in this series, each of which focus on a different area of museum work. The purpose of the workshops is to provide a space for people working in and with museums to talk openly about their experiences of trying to embed anti-racism and decolonisation into their work, the challenges they're facing, and to come up with workable strategies that we can test back in the workplace. They've been designed so that everyone attending will participate in an intimate setting and support each other to develop new and more effective ways of doing this work. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Ilaria Perini and Dr. Anjali Dalal-Clayton from the Decolonising Arts Institute for devising and running this really great programme. I'd also like to introduce and thank my colleagues Marcus Crofton, Jessica Loemberini and Christine Takenyi for supporting the project as well. Today's session focuses on engagement and what it might mean to embed anti-racist and decolonising work in this practice. At the CAS, we've witnessed a rapidly accelerating trend towards a concern with greater representation within collections. So much so that in the last financial year, 69% of our investment in art purchase was devoted to artists of colour. I think that's something to be celebrated. But when the artwork arrives in the museums, it is the work of the curators and engagement teams to fully bring the work to their public, or should I say, to bring the work to the fullest expression of what their public might be. It is a vital part of the role of the museum. The process of research and acquisition is only the beginning of the journey. What endures is the way that the work lives within that museum collection. I'm grateful to Barbie Asante, Amal Khalaf and Sandra Shakespeare for agreeing to collaborate on this session, which will examine some of the ethical and practical issues attaching to this area of museum practice. Thank you to everybody for participating today. I'm sure it will be just a stimulating and richer conversation as the preceding sessions. So I'm going to hand over now, I think, to Sandra. I look forward to it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us all today. I'm just going to go through an outline at the start. So just has to say hello and to welcome to everyone. This is the 6th workshop in the Doing the Work series, which is focusing on rethinking engagement practices and how we can embed anti-racism and or decolonisation when doing engagement work in museums, galleries and heritage sites. So I'm Sandra Shakespeare. As I've said, I'm a facilitator, I'm a coach. I've set up the Black British Museum Project. I'm also director of Museum X, and I'm one of the co-founder members of Museum Detox. A big shout out to everyone who's with Museum Detox in the house. So some of the things today we might discuss include how can art museums, public audience, community engagement practices be expanded to also account for its relationships with, for example, minoritised artists, external collaborators, and its own staff. 2, how can extractive or exploitative engagement practices be reshaped and reconceived as equitable, co-productive, and reciprocal? 3, how can an ethics of care be embedded in engagement practices? 4, what does anti-racist or decolonial approach to engagement involve? And 5, how can approaches to engagement expand beyond engagement with people to engagement with issues, ethics and power relations? So there's just an outline of some of the things hopefully we want to discuss with you all today. So the format, just to go through the format of how it's going to run today, we're going to kickstart the workshop with 2 presentations, and that should help us to get us thinking about some of the issues and challenges at hand, and as possible, some of the strategies to help deal with them. We'll be hearing, as we've heard before, from Barbie Asante about art practice and activist work within museums, and Amal Khalaf, who will be speaking about some of the community engagement projects she has led whilst working at the Serpentine Gallery and more recently at Cubit. Then we're going to take a comfort break and go straight into our breakout groups, where we will each be discussing either a challenge we are grappling with in doing engagement work, or an approach we have trialed for better or worse, and go through our conversation. And we're trying to come up with other tools, approaches, initiatives that we can realistically test out in our respective workplaces. The breakout session will last about an hour, and then we will all come back together to hear what the other groups have been talking about. So does that sound good so far? Can I get a thumbs up? All good? Great. As we've said before, but just to reiterate again, the sessions are being recorded. So you've already been told this by email, but it's just to remind you again that this is all being recorded. We are live. The recordings will not be published, but they'll be held securely by the Contemporary Arts Society and only used for anonymized transcriptions, which will provide the basis for a report at the workshop that you will all have access to. So just want to make that clear at the start. So I think that's so let's just recap what's happening next, because there's quite a lot to get through. We've got a really packed. We'll have a short comfort break for 10 minutes. Please keep the Zoom meeting open and just switch off your camera and mic if you need to step away. We'll come back later. So we'll go through a comfort break later on. Sorry, I think I've got that slightly in the wrong order. So and then after the breakout session, each breakout facilitator, each of us will share our discussion points with you, and we'll come up with key points from the discussions to form strategies that we'll all ask you for your reflections on, and we'll all ask participants to complete a survey, and the survey link will be in the chat room. So does that sound clear to everyone in terms of the format, in terms of the running order? Okay, so I think now I've done everything in terms of the format, in terms of the running order, in terms of the timings. For today, we'll have a short presentation, as I said, by Barbie and Amal. We'll have moderated conversations. That will be myself, Barbie and Amal. We'll have a comfort break at 2 o'clock will be the comfort break. So that's correct, 2 o'clock for the comfort break. We're going to come back after our comfort break, after we've had our drinks and everything, at 2:10. We'll then go into groups. We'll have a feedback session from 3:10, and then we'll have a link to the feedback at 3:20, and then we'll do closings, what's next, from everyone from about 3:25 to 3:30, and then we'll end. So I'm going to introduce you now to our first presentation from Barbie Asante. So Barbie, if you're ready with your presentation.
I don't know if people know who I am, so I should probably tell you a little bit about who I am beforehand. Thank you, Sandra. I'm obviously I'm an artist. I'm based in London. I'm also a lecturer at Goldsmiths. In the Critical Studies department. I teach a course which is called How We Get Free. Today I'm going to, what I'm going to present to you is a piece that I've written, which was written for a book which is called The Trainings for the Not Yet. I've been involved with an organisation in the Netherlands, back an organization for, how can I say, I always really say it badly in Dutch, but their work is really about thinking about actual art and its function. And yes, I've been involved with a program that they've been working with an artist called Jan van Heeswijk for a couple of years, and we're now pulling together this book. And so yeah, so I'm going to just read it as a kind of way of introducing you to some of my work in the last year, and also some of the things I've been thinking about. Now is the time for this performance to become a reality. I can't do this without you. I always start my declarations with this statement. This is a painful declaration of independence. Ama Ata Edu wrote for herself a poem, a declaration of independence. Oh, my dear brother, the decision to sever and separate was not based on the knowledge of me as a forever dreamer, unable and incapable of handling the clear world of take and take and take. Listening to Amma, I dedicate these declarations of independence to the women who contribute to me, inspire me, keep me alive, my mothers, lovers, sisters, cousins, daughters, comrades, and co-conspirators. I am listening to Sweet Honey in the Rock. Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. This the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. I'm reminded that I bring with me a long line of ancestors who survived through many different moments of being unseen, unheard, unsupported, unnoticed. They dreamed me into being. Can you all please close your eyes and listen with me for a moment? I would like you to take some breaths with me. We are going to breathe through our noses and breathe through our mouths. 3 breaths. No need to rush. In and hold and out. In and hold and out. In and hold and out. We would like it if you brought the sunshine every day so the heat can gently caress our bodies. We would like it if we could hear this bird song again and the rhythm of our heartbeats and the wind whistling through the trees, our sonic landscapes being the rhythms of our days and the operas of our nights. I am listening to Salt. Why do we die, 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 die? Why do we cry, 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 cry? Why do we die, 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 die? Why do we cry, 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 cry? We are creating a new declaration of independence while in a global pandemic. We are confined to our homes and separated from our families, friends, and loved ones. We watch as the virus disproportionately kills people like us because of the underlying conditions we have, the conditions that are more than the health conditions, the conditions of the afterlives of hundreds of years of enslavement, coloniality, oppression, and racism. I need the comfort of my sisters as we attempt to witness and weather this time that is not a new normal or a not yet, because there was never a new normal and we cannot wait for the not yet. This is a painful declaration of our interdependence. This separation hurts. There are statements being posted everywhere that our lives suddenly matter because while most people in the world were confined to their homes, they saw the public lynching of a Black man and the shock woke them up, just for a little while. For many educational and cultural arenas, they woke up for just about enough time to write spurious statements of solidarity and intent. Black lives apparently matter now, but what does this really look like? Is this a call to engage with personal and systematic racism, to address the histories, narratives, and privileges afforded to those that live in white skin? What does it mean to be in a practice of listening? Listening to Black women, listening to Indigenous women, listening to women of colour, listening to those who refuse gender norms, listening to each other. What does it mean to be in a practice of listening and to not be seduced by the current trend of diversity, of inclusion, of Black Lives Mattering, but only until this all boils over? I hear Angela Davis saying, freedom is a constant struggle. The not yet is right now. What does it mean to be in a practice of listening and to stand in a position of being anti-empire, to imagine the possibility of liberation for all? Reader, what are you willing to give up? I am listening to Lauren Oya Olamina's Earthseed verses. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. I'm imagining myself walking through the desert sunrise with my sisters. We are wearing beautiful, colourful outfits and listening to the Combahee River Collective statement on a transistor radio. We are making a new declaration of independence, and we cannot be together. Colleen Smith's Desert in Sojourner would be my fantasy declaration site. But even imagining it at this time brings pain, so I have to listen for other ways to bring us together. We are on a Zoom call. We're in separate spaces in London, Ankara, Newcastle, North Wales, Aberdeen, Vancouver, and Grenada. We listen to Anna as she guides us in a ceremony of movement and togetherness. We are not together, but we are surprisingly close. To feel our closeness, I draw on the strength of the memories of our foremothers buried deep within my body. Listening to each other as we dance in the twilight, holding each other in our hearts, we stamp our feet on the warm, dark red earth, bodies making ancient gyrations and repetitions, listening with our eyes, our hands, our hips calling other hips to respond to the movement of the stars and the cackle of the fire and the beat of the drum, the holler of her voice and the curve of her waist. All my cells are jumping with the energy of this light, drawing nourishment from the blood vessels that originated in the mitochondria of my ancestors, finding my soul, finding your soul as we dance. They restricted us, but like in ancient times, we found ways to do it anyway. We found profound ways to be together. Our ancestors dreamed us. We are here to continue that work of dreaming, and we are here in the process of becoming ancestors. I am listening to Ibeyi's Exhibit Diaz, Better in Tune with the Infinite. It's frustrating when you just can't express yourself, and it's hard to trust enough to undress yourself, to stand exposed and naked in a world full of hatred, where sick thoughts of mankind control all the sacred. Excuse my voice today. I remember that we live in and we are in the present of what Saadia Hartman has called the afterlife of slavery, which could also be described as living in the afterlife of colonization, modernity, and its impacts affecting us daily. Neoliberalism, fascism, racism, war, refugeeism, migration, poverty, climate crisis. Listening to my friend, Dr. Karen Salt, she asks that we think about being in the twilight, thinking about the Caribbean as a dreamlike paradise tainted with the horror of a violent history. Karen asks us to think about the toxic soils in which we exist. These soils, not just being actual soil, but maybe if we could consider soil that not only carries the taste of chemicals, pollution, and hard metals, but also the taste of the spilled blood that taints it. These soils are the spaces and places we inhabit. We walk in, we breathe in, we attempt to be in. This is the right now, although The future we want to create is not yet. So we are in a constant state of rehearsal, of practicing. Being in a place of practicing as a state of being, in a constant state of practicing. Processing processes. I try to contend with this all by collaborating, holding these ideas and refusing the centers, but also not holding tight onto the peripheries. Decolonial praxis, liberatory praxis, critical praxis, conspiratorial praxis. Breathing with, planning with, sharing with, fighting with, daring with, loving with, my sisters, my siblings, telling our stories, taking up spaces, attempting to find wholeness in this oh so unjust world, declaring declarations, making a declaration of our interdependence. Can you all take one last breath with me? In for all those who can't breathe, and out for all the times that you have lost your breath. Are you ready to do this? Because the time is now, and because I can't do this without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbie, for your excellent presentation. And my apologies, I completely forgot your bio, so apologies about that. We're going to move over now to our next presenter, Amal.
Hello. Hi. Hi, everybody. So I'm Amal, and I am the civic curator at the Serpentine, and I'm also working at Qubit as a director of programs. So I'm an arts worker. But before I start or do any intros, I just wanted to thank you, Barbie, for that moment of listening. I'm still somehow a little bit with you in that space. And just because we're talking about engagement, I really want to talk about listening just for a second, just to build on what Barbie's just shared, because really I felt it in my body, and I'm sure a lot of you also on this call felt it too. And I think that listening is a really important verb for us to think about today when we're discussing questions of engagement and working with people. And for me, it's definitely the practice which I go to the most. I think a lot of artists I work with work in this way as well. I often think about the Reggio Emilia. I don't know if any of you work with Reggio Emilia framework. So that's like an early childhood pedagogical framework. And it talks about the 100 languages of children, and how when you listen, you have to listen with your whole body. And for me, listening is really this space of political encounter to get to a place which someone is trying to take you to. And I think without that space in your ears, in our ears, in our collective ears, to listen to each other, I don't think it's possible to do any collective work or any collaborative work with anybody. So thank you, Barbie, for bringing us to our bodies and in our ears. So yeah, about me, I'm an artist, I'm a curator. I do many things. I also do lots of organizing and community organizing. But I guess the thing that connects everything that I do is the desire to work in collaboration with others and to explore the transformative possibilities of working together and dreaming together and acting together. And I've been doing this work for the last 15 years, using mostly artistic methodologies, listening practices, learning from artists and histories of radical pedagogy and popular education, as well as learning from people I work with in movement and organizing. And all of these workshops and projects and processes, many of which last many years, that I do within arts institutions, are places where I feel I'm convening collaborative projects with creative practitioners and also people facing real life issues that are thinking about gathering so that they can make changes in where they are living in. And we're like meeting together to intentionally practice the futures we long for. And by futures we long for, I mean futures grounded in justice, love, and possibility. And I wanted to call in the work of this artist, Bronte Velez, who works in the US and runs this project called Led to Life. And she describes collaboration as co-liberation. And I really just believe that any opportunity we have to convene people, to start to talk about, create spaces to talk about the political, to talk about so many issues from grief to injustice, we need to be doing this conversation collectively. So how do we do this in an arts organization? And yeah, I'm just, Ilaria, we can stay on this slide for the moment. Because as somebody that has been in this position, so my job title right now, I've worked for the last 11 years at the Serpentine. My job title is the civic curator. So I've been working on projects offsite. I've had many names, job titles for what I do. I've worked with many different collaborators, both in the institution and outside of it. But I've always been the person that is based outside, based in this area. You can see on the map here, this is from an old pamphlet of the Arabic Center, and it shows Hyde Park, where Kensington Gardens, where Serpentine is based, right on the bottom left of this picture. And then you see where that little speech bubble is that says Markaz al-Arabi, that's the Edgware Road. So I really started working within this arts organization already with this kind of external role, that my purpose is to kind of convene people outside of the organization. And this like education, this kind of outreach community role is essentially for me like a very colonial gesture. It's very much like go and bring people to the arts, and they will come to the mothership and everyone would learn, and go out there and spread the blessing of art in these communities that need it. And from I was working with this incredible thinker and activist, Jana Graham, at the time. And so she was really like instrumental in supporting me and really validating the questions I had about this gesture, especially being the Arab-speaking, Arab, POC, Muslim, brown person, the only person in the institution with that identity. And I was the person tasked with going out and building all of these relationships. So how do I carry this like desire for the political and desire for, transformative processes with art and liberatory practices within essentially a structure, an institution, which I believe a lot of museums and arts institutions, and in fact, academic institutions, they're all built on colonial violence and are still implicated in ongoing violence. If we think about gentrification, if we think about boards, if we think about investments, for example. So I would just like to add, for anybody here on this call that is also an institutional worker working with communities or tasked with engagement, I do believe that it is like an impossibly difficult job. But I think it's also a space in which we can really, transform institutions potentially in different ways from the outside, and also think about the different roles institutions can have and different ways of instituting otherwise. So just going back to the body, I wanted to talk about desire, and this slide is kind of summarizes for me what I think this work is about, and I wanted to think about my own desire for creating spaces to talk about social change and liberation. But I think that no matter where you are in terms of lived experience of racism or colonization, and where we sit on the spectrum of privilege, I think we have to ask ourselves about our desires, when we're doing this work. And I think as someone that's part of resistance struggles, of course, you know, my desire to do this stuff is really important, but like in co-research, in commissioning projects with communities, especially if you're instigating long-term processes, which I think is, for me, the best way to work in order to build like equitable relationships, whose desire is really important to bring to the forefront. And it's definitely not mine. It's definitely not the institution's desire, I think, when we're talking about this kind of practice. And it's somewhere sitting between the artist and the people that we're working with. And I think taking this position of centering the desires of the people we're working with, or here I've written it as, you know, hoping to reorient a series of practices towards the desires of a local context. I feel like that is the position from which I begin. And it's a way for me to at least start to build some boundaries between maybe more extractive tendencies of institutions when it comes to working with other people. So how do we then, as people that are implicated in ongoing violence in communities, how do we then support people, groups, or start to talk, you know, engage with issues that are resisting or critical of the very violence that the institution's implicated in? And I think that this is the impasse that a lot of people reach when they're convening other people within institutions. I think being very clear about how conflicted things are in terms of your position is really important to make visible. And I think it's all about, for me, all of these practices is about defining power, naming power, and not leaving power to be this kind of invisible space, like hovering above any projects that we're doing. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah, I mean, this is just like a slide. This is an image from Sisters Uncut at the former site of the Holloway prison, which is now where people are resisting it being turned into luxury flats. I've been doing a lot of work in this context, but I kind of wanted to ground this here in the sense that for me, the genealogies of this type of work isn't, you know, looking to more, you know, traditional art education histories or histories of education at all. It's more looking at the work of organizers and thinking about pedagogical processes or convening pedagogical processes within, you know, from the space of the political and political organizing. Could we go to the next slide? Yeah, so this is some of the work I'm doing. So just as a bit of an insight, I have been working in and around the Edgware Road neighborhood for the past 11 years. I've been working on about the way that I have been working has been through collaborative commissions. So I've worked on about 60 over the last 11 years. And so this would really involve, I would call it a way of embedding artists within different community settings. I work a lot in civic institutions, in street squares like this on the Edgware Road, but also, you know, embedded in hospitals, working alongside unions, and not just in London, but also in Beirut and Cairo. And I think a lot of this work really starts from this position of like, what does it mean for us as arts workers to go out to neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods undergoing so much change or rapid gentrification, with communities experiencing real violence, you know, threat to their life, threat to their livelihoods through draconian immigration policies and racist policing methodologies. So I feel like when you're entering these spaces, it's really more about creating spaces to think about who's allowed to decide the future of the place we're in, and thinking about the role that arts processes or art projects could be intertwined with them. So how do we facilitate spaces? I think the question for me is always like, how do we facilitate spaces to embed arts and pedagogical practices meaningfully within wider processes of social organizing or community initiatives? So just to be more specific, there are projects, for example, I'm working on where artists are embedded for 3 years, working with social care staff across a borough with full access to their processes. So it's really creating a space, you know, and this is within a borough that's already trying to transform their social care methodology to stop it being so violent and cold, and introducing more narrative, more embodied practices into the way social workers work. So those kind of relationships for me are already meeting people where they're already practicing. And I think it's really important to bring that to the forefront. I can't talk about all of the projects, so I thought I would just share maybe one process with some of you here, so there's something more tangible to describe the work I'm doing. So maybe we can go to the next slide and we can scroll through them a little bit. So I'm showing you images that are from a long-term project I've been doing called Implicated Theater. And this has been a project that was this was created as part of the Center for Possible Studies, which was like an offsite space that was run by Jana Graham and myself from 2009 to 2013 on the Edgware Road. So this was a theatre project that uses the methodologies of Auguste Boal. So something I'd really like to bring to this space that I have no time to talk about is really looking back to really well-known, well-disseminated practices from radical pedagogy, like Freire teaches, like Bell Hooks teaches and speaks to in a way that's more digestible for me, but also like the work of people like Auguste Boal. So they bring this political theatre methodology that really undoes these hierarchies that often exist in any education program or engagement program with like the powerful institution or artist and a group of people that need support. So within the Theatre the Oppressed, which is the Boal methodology that we use in Implicated Theatre, it's really using the body, privileging the body and embodiment over language. It's about organizing and responding to real life issues. This is an example of some of the work we're doing. So we meet regularly on a weekly basis. The whole project is led by Francis Rifkin. It was originated by Nowhere, Noor Afshan Mirza and Brad Butler. And we were responding to immigration raids that were happening on the road, and Nowhere wanted to make a film about it. But instead we said, let's make a collaborative script. And these workshops that began in 2009 have continued for another 10 years afterwards. The group kept on meeting and growing. And what started to happen after a year of us meeting in this way, using this methodology where you can kind of bring issues you're facing and rehearse them with a group of people, new outcomes for the situation. So we've been using this methodology alongside unions. We've been thinking about ways we can bring these theatre methodologies into teaching English. So what you're seeing here is a workbook that we developed with radical ESOL teachers that kind of bring political practice easily into their classrooms. And yeah, I can share a lot more about this work in the breakout room, because part of what I'm interested in doing is thinking about sharing methodologies for other people to bring more kind of political practices or equitable practices into their work with other people. But I've only got a minute, and I know I've got a minute, but maybe we can leave the slides now and just leave it on there. But I really just wanted to read a little bit too, just to close. Because I do think that the people on this call and people that might be working in museums that want to start to undo and unlearn some of these more extractive ways of working, which have been really embedded in institutional ways of working for so long in these essentially, you know, built on colonial violence institutions. So I feel like that the work of decolonizing, you know, really begins inside. And so I'm just going to do a bit of a reading. I'm sorry, all the moderators, for this, but I just really wanted to share something that I wrote. Please bear with me. Many people are waking up to the fact that old ways of working and these old metastructures need to change. And we know that the people that are best placed to make a vision and to imagine the new structures to come are not the ones that were centered and winning in the old ways of being in the world. And that gives me hope. If we're collective, we need everyone. If we are a collective, we need everyone to be willing to be part of building the visions. To co-create more possibilities means making sure as many lived experiences are in the room at the same time. We need to be intersectional. We need to understand our own complexity, how we benefit from oppression, how we're implicated in the oppression of others, and also how we've been impacted by oppression in the world. I just wanted to also read this idea of what it means to release old ways of working and being. I think it's really difficult. I really understand what it's like to be like the union rep in your organization, to be the only person of color in the institution, to be gaslit constantly, to doubt your own intuition all the time. And I think that especially as POC people, especially as people that are on the front line of engaging with people, with groups of people that are not funded by or paid by the institution, I think you also start to embody things of the institution. So I've been trying to undo this in lots of different ways, because you can hold the types of practices I briefly described just now, but there's so much more you're holding as well. And so I've been calling it like a decomposing death ritual. So I'm just going to read a little bit more and then we can end. Releasing the ways violent systems have imprinted themselves on our bodies is both a process of freedom and a death ritual. Can we adapt and move towards a liberatory future without reproducing more violence? Experiencing and witnessing so much rage and grief, we're in a dance between survival, trauma, and supremacist ideology and behavior. How we choose to act, who we align with, and how we make work starts to resonate with all the choices we're making in the world. As we try and synchronize our tempos to set new worlds in motion, how do we find new rhythms through which the urge to live can be expressed collectively? Adaptation embodies an impulse of this moment, a commitment to living with and through change. How do we meet constant change and stay rooted in our intention? What choreographic notations could we write to adapt to a future we long for? Thank you.
Thank you, Amal. Thank you, Barbie. A round of applause. And I'm so sorry, but my phone went off just as I was about to read your bio. I mean, gosh, you know what? These things happen, don't they? So apologies to you both. I just missed your introductions, but thank you both for just really warm your presentations, because it's just what we need right now. And sometimes we just need that space to just breathe. And, you know, what you both brought to the table, you're sharing, you know, I could have listened to you for the rest of the day and just said to everyone, listen, just lean in here. So I wondered if you could both just unmute. We've got about just a few minutes. We could just have a chat, maybe just reflections. I'm going to come back to you, Barbie, just reflections on some of your work. I mean, I read out the set of questions. We can kind of stick to a script if you want, but the first question, because I know we've all got this, was around art museums and public audiences and the word community and how it can be expanded to account for those relationships with minoritized artists. What do you want to say on that, particularly when we're talking about the relationship between artists and external collaborators and staff?
Well, I mean, I've been in this, if, you know, some people say it's not business. I've been in this field for a long time. I started working, you know, with communities quote unquote, when I was in college. This is back in the early 90s. So I've worked and I've watched it change. So I was really appreciative of you, Amal, bringing in the image of the Sisters Uncut thing, because I just recall who I was working with, those people that I was working with, people like Emergency Exit Arts, and people who were like, had this kind of radical history. I was reminded recently when I did some work with Prissy Tiller, where these kind of engagement histories kind of came from, you know, the kinds of work that's sort of been incorporated into arts institutions, but kind of not. And yeah, so and every time I kind of think through these processes and where I've been kind of dragged along in these kind of, you know, with arts institutions trying to define socially engaged practice or this or that or whatever, the more and more I've been like in a kind of refusal of doing work in engagement, of being an artist that is kind of implicated in these kind of processes of engagement. And so I'm very choosy about who I work with, how I work with people, and what Amal said about that kind of relationship between the, you know, we're not kind of putting on the agenda from the organization, usually really thinking through the relationship between myself and the people that I'm working with. And I've taken that on a lot more. So developed in 2014, did a big project with Innova, and we developed a collective out of that. The collective has been working, worked for like kind of 3 or 4 years, doing lots of institutional work. It was called Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable, collective of young people. I think people also, I also chose to sort of develop situations where I'm working, when you talk about communities of people that I'm interested in. So my declaration of independence that I talk about is working in relation with Black and women of color, women, trans women, non-binary people of color who you know, want to kind of have a conversation with institutions and histories, and really to think about the kinds of histories and violences that kind of still perpetuated through institutions. So we do these declarations, these live declarations within institutions. So in a way, I'm kind of, I suppose I'm rethinking my way of using that I'm not doing engagement for being instrumentalized. I'm doing engagement because this is me being in dialogue with people that I want to be in dialogue with. Happens to be that the material, the places that I'm probably having more of a dialogue or my material is kind of a bit reversed. It's kind of is the institution. So we bring this work into institutions, but actually, you know, it is the institution that I'm challenging. With any institution that wants to have that kind of conversation and dialogue with me. It's been easier for some, and it's been really difficult for others. I think one of the words that I would like to pick up on is the difference between, is the context of this conversation and this idea of thinking about decolonization, and the context of thinking about decolonization, diversification, or diversity and inclusion and representation. These are not the same things, but they're often conflated. And you know, decolonization is painful. I think I've just recently put something that was published in the artist newsletter. You know, it's a painful process. It's a process I know a lot of people wouldn't want to go through, and it has a history, and we mustn't forget the history. The history comes through kind of, you know, Pan-African movements and you know, different kinds of movements are still doing it, like Zapatistas and all these different movements that are doing it. Even the movement in Palestine right now, that it's a painful work. And I do think that we have to be careful on how we're thinking about that language. And I don't know if I'm so doing it rather than actually trying to bring in certain kinds of ethics of care and consideration and thinking and challenging around kind of arts practice and institutions, and really thinking about liberation and liberatory practices. That's my kind of thought processes. But it has been a long journey. It's been a journey that has gone through sort of a lot of moments of really being in conversation with institutions and saying, no, I don't think that this way of working with children in this school, in this organization, is just, I can't work with you anymore. So yeah.
Thank you for that, Barbie. You know, you mentioned a really important word, you know, that ethical care. And I want to jump over to you, Amal, if I may, because it's one of the questions I had here, but it's an important one around the ethics of care and how we embed those in engagement practices. You know, what does that mean for you in terms of your practice and the work you're doing around with the communities you work with?
Yeah, I mean, and also just to pick up, just to make that bridge with you, Barbie, and that kind of question of language and how language is used. And I think language is really powerful, and that's why I feel like the language of the body and like making space and having and engaging people in more embodied ways that aren't privileging kind of violent languages and words that kind of aren't felt by the people you're working with is really important. And for me is really important to the question of transformative spaces that you hope you're creating through these processes and projects, or liberatory spaces. But yeah, on the question of an ethic of working with people, I think it very much is, I feel like a lot of this work is almost like a protection work, just building on this question of visibility. And, you know, you touched on it in that piece, the declaration, Barbie. It's just kind of like there were lots, you know, we're in the industry of like the visible and the visual, and like evidencing is really important and part of a lot of this work. And part of, if I was to speak of an ethic, because there's so many different methods maybe that I would use with people, is one of protection and making sure that there's space for many things to be happening in the work, the processes that are being instigated, that are not all in service to the institution, are not all in service to the artists, that are also in service to other things that the groups of people you're working with are kind of grounded in. And the other ethic I take in that sense is also to take a position. I think if you're working in institutions, I think this has come up a lot, especially in the last few months around Palestine, is that we're told as charities we're not able to take a political position, like there's a legal framework around it. So I think it's important when you're working with people and you're talking about really life and death issues and situations, and you're convening these questions in workshops, that you need to come from a position too, and to make those things visible. So I think there's an ethic around visibility. Like there's this really wonderful trio quote I'm gonna try and find, because I came across it yesterday. Yes, the ultimate mark of power may be its invisibility. The ultimate challenge is the exposition of its roots. And so my ethic is then, how do we keep the roots of these institutions and maybe these kind of political the type of power and domination that these institutions may have, how do we keep making those visible? And how are we able to keep parts of our processes invisible to the institution or to things when we need to, so that there's like a safety, so that there are other things that are happening in that space. And so I think I spend a lot of energy and a lot of resourcing into managing and thinking with the people I'm working with, be it the artists or the groups that I'm working with, the people and communities, on thinking what it is, like what are our desires and what are the many outcomes, and what are we going to share with the world, what are we going to share with our kind of comrades or friends or other people working with these issues, and what are we going to kind of keep safe here in this space. And so I just want to bring that here because I know this happens in any process, any context of engaging or teaching or holding space. But I feel like it's important to bring this into institutional practice where there's a whole other language, a whole other way of reporting and making visible that you have to fight against or navigate. So, yeah.
Thank you. It's so true, and honestly, so many questions, and I know. Thank you, Emma. That just one of the questions that somebody's just put in. Lots of thanks, both of you, for your fantastic presentations, your thoughts, your insights, your perspectives. And there was a question around centering desire in brackets of communities. How do we discern them? What voices do we listen to ignore in spaces like museums? But I'm going to park it there because we need to take our comfort break. And when we come back from the comfort break, which is 10 minutes, you'll be put into groups. You'll be assigned your groups, and we'll all break out and we can have more. We can pick up on these conversations there. So keep your questions coming, and we're going to have our comfort break now. So you can turn your camera off, recharge, do what you need to do. Let's just take 10 minutes and come back. So see you all on the other side. Bye.